Good day to you all. Good morning to some, good afternoon to others, and good evening. Bonjour, hola, salbona. Today we are talking to you from all across the world. We have a webinar today, which is part of the World Urban Campaign Urban Thinkers Campus. And the title of it today is Healthy Environments Through Architecture. So a great welcome to you all from all over the world. You would have seen that we have got a wide range of speakers, and I'll introduce them to you shortly from now on. This event was born out of a discussion that I had with Ray Pentecost. Ray is the UIA Public Health Group chairperson, and I was talking to him online one day. We've had quite a few online discussions, and he had felt that we weren't doing enough perhaps with the public health group within the UIA, and I'd always envisaged that the public health group was one of designing hospitals. And one day he said to me, all architecture should be good for health. And that got us thinking about putting together this webinar. And it's on the back of the other UTC webinars that we've had thus far, and the recent one that I was involved in was with the SDG Commission. So hence we are here today. The event is 2 hours long, and we have 9 exceptional speakers, one being a joint presentation. Unfortunately, Mugure Njendu let us know about 4 hours ago that she had a family emergency. I believe someone of their family is in hospital. And I was just saying a moment ago to the others that we've been very blessed to have Florence Mignolet come on board. She's got 2 little wings on her back, as I said earlier, and has climbed in at the 11th hour to represent Kenya and Africa. So thank you very much again, Florence. We remind ourselves about the various UTC themes, and the one theme that we've been mostly looking at is a plan, and there's a few words that they give you: options of green, productive, inclusive, resilient, safe and healthy city. So we're mainly looking at health and safety, obviously, but any of those aforementioned words could actually be pertinent to what we're going to be doing here today. As I mentioned, we've got 2 hours, a lot of speakers, and I hope that we don't run out of time. The format for today will be that I will shortly hereafter introduce the UIA president. The UIA today is in partnership with the IFHP, which is the International Federation for Housing and Planning, and we're very grateful to them for joining us in this partnership in this presentation today. Brigitte will be speaking on their behalf, and after the introduction by our president, Thomas Fournier, Brigitte will be the first to speak. So once we've done the presentations, each speaker will get about 5 minutes to present. And thereafter, depending on time, we will ask questions of them. And they could be pre-planned questions, or they could be questions born out of the conversation. And any of the speakers are welcome to leisurely intervene and talk and respond. Thereafter, again, if there's time, there is a chat box, I believe, in this session, and you can enter any questions that you may want answered. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to our UIA president, Thomas Fournier, for the welcome. Thank you, Thomas.
Kevin, thank you so much. Thank you, panelists. Hello, and greetings to all of our participants across the globe. I am going to share my screen now. Let's see if I can. I add my thanks to our partners in this, which of course includes UN Habitat and the World Urban Campaign, and to the Federation. Here's who I am. I am the president of the International Union of Architects, for those of you who don't know. And I think you know now the theme for today's program. And of course, I think it will be dominated by discussions about the pandemic now underway all across the globe. For my part, I am hoping to hear about what I would call back to basics and the issues of sunlight and air and access to sunlight and air in buildings. I have been watching very closely for a couple of clients of mine, the discussions surrounding the opening of educational facilities, particularly higher education facilities, and dominating that discussion is the very issue of sunlight and air, the access to natural ventilation. If I look at the recommendations that are starting to surface, in this case from the Center for Active Design, I encourage you to look at their website. What you see is, I think, a set of recommendations and guidelines coming forward that are starting to look fairly similar. If I look even in the European context and the money that is being spent by countries within the European Union on measures designed to make it safer to reopen facilities, we come back to these issues of natural ventilation and access to sunlight. Here's a picture of New York's Mayor de Blasio looking at a school building and making sure that the windows operate. For those of you who don't know much about the UIA, let me just say that our mission can be easily encapsulated by thinking of the three initials in our name. And I think we are engaged in this webinar in the I of the UIA, and that is an attempt to influence policies. We have worked with others to develop guidelines, and I know that one of our panelists is going to call for a more proactive posture in these matters having to do with the pandemic. And it seems to me that this very area of guidelines is one area in which we could be much more proactive. We have already approached the World Health Organization with an entreaty, I would say a plea for them to engage in more research about the importance of natural ventilation and the scrubbing of air in combating the spread of disease and contaminants in indoor environments, and I hope we will press upon that. It seems to me there are many audiences possible for this kind of guideline and approach. I've listed a few that occur to me. There are probably others, and I hope that one outcome of this, Kevin and colleagues, might be a resolve to try and move forward with partners on looking at what guidelines might be possible. When we talk about sunlight and air, let's not forget the fact that both of those are changing character. Sunlight has become a sort of different phenomenon in the European context, largely, I think, as a result of extreme weather that's coming out of climate change, and of course, the quality of air. And interestingly, we heard in a seminar just last week about the importance of outdoor air quality and trying to do everything we can to improve outdoor air quality so that we can, in fact, design for healthy environments through architecture. Those are my opening remarks. I'm going to stay with you for the duration and listen with great interest to what is said. But thank you all for participating and for giving me the honor of opening this session. Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you very much, Thomas. We go first of all to our partner in this from the IFHP, and I'd like to introduce to you all our first speaker, as I say, Regitze Marianne Hess. Regitze is a Copenhagen-based architect with a career in knowledge exchange and communication for international fora and with international stakeholders on projects and activities, both large and small, pertaining to the built environment. She has a twofold education, holding degrees of Candidates of Architecture from the Royal Danish Academy of Fine Arts, the School of Architecture, Copenhagen, Denmark, and the Bachelor of Engineering, Civil, from McGill University, Montreal in Canada. Regitze is both a member of the Danish Association of Architects and a leading figure and member in the International Federation of Housing and Planning, serving and advancing the UN Sustainable Development Goals, including leading the IFHP's contribution to Habitat 3 and the new urban agenda. Regitze, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. I would like to share with you a few thoughts today on social cohesion and physical configuration through the lens of IFHP. Now, we talk, all of us, a lot about the Sustainable Development Goals, and in this context of architecture, we may feel very married to goal number 11, but in this conversation today, we're actually in the intersection between goal number 3, good health and well-being, and the built environment. And really, if we're going to move on this, we need to think about partnerships. Thomas has already alluded to this, or said it quite bluntly. Now, the International Federation for Housing and Planning is an organization that's been around since 1913. And the premise for the International Federation for Housing and Planning was the advancement of the Garden City movement, which was all about, in many ways, models for more sunlight and more clean air. And the terminology just happened to be a bit different about 100 years ago. I would like to say that IFHP has been addressing sustainability, livability, and resilience the past century. Now, IFHP has its roots in the Garden City movement, which goes even farther back to 1898. And we often think of a certain model, but the Garden City, and I'll show you that image subsequently, but the Garden City was discussing the urban-rural divide. It was discussing the socioeconomics, and it was discussing governance models. We often think of the Garden City movement as this image on the left-hand side as a model for satellite cities, but we have to bear it, or what some also say, the precursor of suburbia as we know it. But the Garden City was very much thinking about social sustainability and economic sustainability hand in hand with a physical planning model. Now, I sometimes feel like I'm 100 years old, but I have only been working with IFHP for about the past 15 years. And in my time, 2007, we really refocused on the urban rural shift. And then 2015 became quite important for everybody with the Sustainable Development Goals. And IFHP played our small part in the delivery of the New Urban Agenda, which came in 2016. And in light of the Sustainable Development Goals and the New Urban Agenda, IFHP decided to look back to its roots as not merely a physical planning model, but to really think about the social, not only the environmental or the economic sustainability, but the social sustainability of our cities, neighborhoods, households. So IFHP in recent years is trying to rebalance sustainability with a focus on the social pillar. And the social pillar means also, if we look at sustainability as this trilogy, which many know, of course, the social pillar is looking at health and well-being, safety and security, comfort and happiness. And also, I'm even adding in a little bit of Danish terminology today, hygge, lykke, and lyst. The reason why I'm adding in the Danish words, which are now becoming quite hip and being used quite a few places, is that currently this international federation is located in Copenhagen. It has otherwise been located throughout Europe and has a global reach in terms of membership and the dialogue on best practices in housing and planning, models for housing and planning. What are people doing? But we would like to focus on the social. And the way we feel that we need to rebalance the focus on the social, and that means health and well-being, is trying to gauge social sustainability on par with the numbers that often dictate or get more credence, which one can find in measures of economics and measures of environmental sustainability. So we're trying to ramp up, and how do we gauge our well-being, our health, and how does our society contribute to this? And we're trying to look at this not as in sheerly the physics of a house or the physics of the city, but to think about the household, the neighborhood, who our neighbors are, and the cities and their citizens. And today we're out trying to gauge health and well-being, social sustainability. And this image for me today is a bit twofold, because also today, as we speak, our world is becoming quite divided. We need to segregate. And there is a lot of use of the word of social distancing. I think we really need to remember we're talking about physical distancing at the moment, and trying to configure our cities, our neighborhoods, and our households for social cohesion, keeping distancing, the physical distancing in mind. And I think this is a great challenge we have at the moment. We're trying to foster a cross collaboration on issues of housing and planning in relation to the built environment and in relationship to health and well-being and many other factors. But right now, these must be the pressing issues. We are trying to look at policy that exists and also inform and advise on policy going forward. And we really do believe that we need data-driven strategies. We do believe in show me the numbers is the way we're going to be able to get resonance amongst leadership and governing factors. Because we believe that if we're going to configure our cities and neighborhoods and housing better for a healthier, for better fostering health and well-being, we're going to need to have partnerships that recognize the importance of good leadership, agile leadership, and good governance structures. So therefore, I put partnership in the middle of what we need to achieve. And that is what I would like to share with you now. As I said, IFHP is now headquartered in Copenhagen. So we are also looking very much forward to when UIA comes to Copenhagen in 2023. And that is the words from me.
Thanks very much, Regissa. Excellent presentation. You could unshare your screen when you finish. Thank you. Our next presenter is a joint presentation, two presenters. Both of them are French, and they fortunately are going to be speaking English to us today, and I'd like to welcome them on board. The presenters are, firstly, Suzanne Dieu is a doctor of ENT medicine, honorary associate professor at the University of Angers. She created the Master of Health Risks in the Built Environment and initiated the new profession of health engineering in the built and urban environment. In 1986, she founded Medico and developed a comprehensive approach to environmental health focus, focusing on building, health, and interaction. Since 2011, she has organized a national symposium, the Health Building Challenges, it's called. She has also published several reference books and guides. As part of her mission to assist the project management, she participates in numerous projects to improve the consideration of health in the act of building and developing the city. She works with manufacturers for the sanitary characterization of traditional, but also geo-based and bio-based recycle, reuse construction equipment and products. She also works with building managers where her expertise is required for the diagnosis and management of problems of indoor air quality, electromagnetic exposure, etc. And who will be speaking today is Marianne Hess, who graduated from Grenoble's National University of Architecture in 2013 with a HMONP. That's an accreditation to exercise architecture under one's own name. She works for Tangram Architects in Marseille and Myanmar, developing projects for public space, collective housing, and the international campus of Dulwich School in Yangon. In 2015, she received an advanced master's degree in energy efficiency for building renovation from the Engineering University La Mine de Saint-Étienne. This expertise brought her to develop commissioning strategies for the company Operain, and later on advising on renovation and construction for the local agency for energy and climate in Lyon. As renovation often confronts issues with air quality, and consequently she consequently began to get involved with the subject in 2019. She joined the team of Medico to encourage project managers to be more attentive to health issues in buildings. Marianne, over to you.
Hi, everybody. So first of all, thank you for the UIA for the invitation. So it's been quite some time. I didn't have the opportunity to speak English in a professional occasion, so I will count on your kindness, and hopefully my French accent will only make you smile. So I will share my screen. Okay. Here we go. Is it working? Is it working? Yeah.
Yeah, working.
Working. Great. So, you know, health is precious. Very often we think health is just a lack of illness, but actually in 1946, the World Health Organization defined health as a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. So actually buildings are the first place where we spend time. It's about 80% of our time indoor. So architecture plays a big role in protecting us from outdoor aggressions, but it also has to ensure the inside, dealing with the physical and psychological balance of people. So the COVID pandemic aside, we're dealing with the increase of asthmatic people, cancers, heart disease, depression. Last decades in the building conception, we put all our efforts on energy saving. Today, we need to add more attention to human health, not underestimating the impact of well-being. So urban and built spaces impact our well-being when they respond to different human needs. Of course, every type of people, depending on its age, occupation, income, family, will have different needs. So you won't conceive building in the same way for elder people or families or students. But which needs are we talking about? We can divide those needs in three families. First, we've got physiological needs that are essential to live. Second, we have needs that are related to our senses and sensitivity. And then needs that are related to psychological and social field. So let's focus on these different needs, starting with the essential, the physiological needs. So we need to breathe. So buildings have to provide the proper air. Indeed, we breathe full time, about 2,000 liters per day. So keep in mind that if you can survive 3 days without water, 30 days without food, you won't last more than 3 minutes without breathing. We need proper environment to sleep, to drink, to eat, eliminate, move, and rest. We also have sensory needs. So we're using every day our 5 senses: see, hear, smell, touch, taste. And to go further, we have sensitive needs. That parks makes you feel sense of beauty, feel the space, feel the warm, cold, wet, dry atmosphere. About psychological needs, the list can be very long, but let's just quote the feeling of intimacy, security, tranquility, aesthetic, creativity, play, self-esteem, and so on. And finally, let's introduce the last need with this quote of Aristotle: man is by nature a social animal. So designing regarding friendliness, connection, sharing, services, belonging will definitely impact people's health. So now, taking these needs into account, how do we translate them in our practice? You're going to see that there's many parameters on which we can work. That's one of the reasons why we need to involve everyone that play a role in building and urban spaces. Regarding psychological aspects, what are we going to work on? Air quality, water quality, waste management. We can promote healthy lifestyle with physical activity, healthy food. Concerning sensory environment, we can work on the acoustic, natural light, work on color, texture. About sensitive environment, how do we treat urban heat islands? How do we reduce exposure to magnetic fields? And for psychological needs, how do we create a feeling of security? How do we integrate art in our surrounding and place to relax? And to finish, it's important that urban spaces and buildings promote connection between people. So where do people meet? Which kind of equipment could be shared so that you could meet your neighbors, etc. So now I just want to introduce a project we've been working on at Medeco. So it's a head office of a bank located in Lyon. We've been assisting the architects and the owner to renovate this office with health design. This work was supported with the French label Osmose. It's the equivalent of the WELL certification. So the building is now turning its back to the city. People only access it by car, no pedestrian way to access it. And they won't really meet each other from one side to the other side of the building. The project was to create connection between the city, creating a pedestrian way, creating a hub. It was conceived like a village square, and people would have to cross it and have the opportunity to meet each other. We're creating some outdoor social spots that are closer to the desk of people. We're working with the connection to vegetation, creating views and easy access to the green area in the middle. We're looking at natural light so that no one would be forgotten. Working on air quality, paying attention to the radon coming from the ground, choice of material with lower organic compound emission and efficient ventilation. And we also looked at the transformer location to reduce exposure to electromagnetic fields with people around. So to conclude and go back to our daily subject, we wanted to highlight the main problems revealed by the pandemic and the lockdown. First of all, we saw that there is a lack of indoor space. Apartments become smaller and the lockdown has been an issue for many people. School toilets need to be adapted and organized in order to facilitate hand washing for children. We also have insufficient flexibility of spaces to isolate infected people. We have sufficient flexibility in apartment to deal with home office. And in addition, many people suffer from a lack of outdoor space, which is directly connected to mental health. And to finish, many buildings have inadequate air renewal and poor ventilation equipment. So as designer, contractor, don't forget that humans are the reason why we build things, and realize that you have a great opportunity to improve people's life. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Marianne. Excellent presentation. Really enjoyed looking at your building work you've been doing there as well. I'll come back to questions and answers. And if my French was anything like your English, I'd be very proud. So exceptionally well done. Thank you. On to our next speaker. And for those that have joined us, not at the beginning, but more recently, just to let you know that our next speaker, Magure Njendu, couldn't make today. She had a family emergency, and very kindly, Florence Nyole has joined us, also from Kenya, and I'll introduce her to you now. So thank you very much, Florence, once again for standing in. Florence is a registered architect running a partnership practice called Eco Space Architects, and is a leader in her field and the current chairperson of the Architects Chapter of the Architectural Association of Kenya. second woman to lead the chapter, and the current president of the East Africa Institute of Architects. Previously, she worked at Waweru, an associate architects, mostly on the University of Nairobi Towers. She also spends time in academia as a tutor fellow at the University of Nairobi. Florence has experience in both high-end and low-cost sustainable design, working in communities, and has won an award for her work in the design of the Mara Girls Leadership School as the best education project during the AAK Buracoat Awards of Excellence in 2017. She has used her experience working with the Classroom Africa program to develop and maintain schools across various landscapes under the African Wildlife Foundation, as well as in her practice. Florence, thank you again, and over to you. Is anyone seeing Florence? Seems to be a general problem at the moment. Florence, could you hear us, Florence?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me now?
Yes, you can now. Thank you. You're able to share your screen.
Yes, just a moment. Are you able to see my screen? Okay.
Yes, sure. Yes, you can.
Maybe I'm
Thank
not.
you.
Yes.
I had trying to just start the slideshow. It seems not to be working. All right, I apologize. I'm not able to share my screen, so I'll just proceed with my conversation.
Would you like us to go on to the
Are
next
you able
speaker?
to hear me?
Sorry, would you like us to go on to the next speaker and then allow you time to get ready?
I'm able, let me, are you able to hear me?
Clearly, yes.
All right, I will speak without my presentation because it was only one image. And the image was an image of Nairobi. Just at the beginning of the COVID-19 period, we experienced a very clear blue sky in Nairobi for about 4 weeks into the COVID-19 period. There was less movement, of course, due to the lockdown. There were less, which means less pollution through vehicles or other activities. And with this, then we were able to see that actually it's human activities are the ones that push forward the issue of pollution in the air, but not only that, but also architecture in which people are going to work and even the air quality that is presented that emitted out into the atmosphere is not as clean as it should be. And therefore, from ourselves here in Nairobi, and just having heard about joining this webinar in a short moment, one of the first things that came to my mind was that we need to ensure that human activities are taking place in a way and in a system that ensures that not only the environments are healthy, but even our cities continue to be healthy. We are looking at a situation where air quality is very important, both indoor air quality and outdoor air quality. And we all know that the advent of climate change is the quality of air that we're having, the emissions that we're having from our buildings. So how do we ensure that even as we're having healthy environments, the kind of products that we're using to do construction in terms of embodied energy, in terms of the toxic materials that we are using to do our construction, that is one of the key areas that we really need to look into. The second thing is to also ensure that even as we continue to build, we do not lock out nature. We do not lock out nature from our buildings, and this goes a long way in ensuring that our environments continue to create a tranquility within the building. In this case, the use of even ensuring that the indoor and outdoor sequencing in some areas. And I'm sorry, I happen to have been somewhere and jumped in, so people might be walking back and forth behind me, but we're still together. And it so happens, so the tranquility that we can create by ensuring that our indoor and outdoor environments are all and being when we're doing our own internal natural spaces and nature is maintained, that can really help to enhance even the indoor air better in environments where they're able to see. Thinking about here is also daylight. And on a Sunday, I had a presentation regarding daylight when it comes to some of the projects we have here in Kenya. Is that the rooms are so small and so squeezed that during the day, a lot of people are switching on lights. They're having artificial lighting in the buildings as opposed to ensuring that daylight actually accesses the internal spaces of the buildings. So in terms of design, one of the things that we're really pushing forward, and even through our development control and the councils that approve constructions in the buildings, we're talking about, we're trying to push them to say that, there's a certain threshold below which they should not go when it comes to window to wall ratio, when it comes to access to daylight, because as we all know, daylight is a very psychological thing, and it can enable people to even live and work well, and be able to even have that sense of daytime. It's now morning time, it's noon, it's evening, it's afternoon, and it enables even just a healthier environment in terms of working and living. We're also looking at architecture that increases security and safety, which then enhances what we call social economic progress in these places. How do we design our cities and even our buildings to enhance safety and security, which then enhances social economic allow for thriving of such environments. And we know that, especially in Africa, those are very key issues that when people feel safe, even getting into a building, when they feel safe and secure, working in a certain environment, it improves the health of that area. And of course, when people have a thriving social and economic lives, there's some form of health, even in terms of the general populace. And that's a very important thing that we will be looking at. And I believe this particular conversation is just at the beginning of or the continuation of many conversations that have taken place over the years, and these are some things we wish to bring on board. One of the things, and all the last things, especially here in our context, is the issue of water and sanitation, a major issue. We find that 50% of the city does not have access to clean water. So how do they live? How do they cook? How do they sanitize? Yet we know that when somebody wakes up in the morning, the first thing they would have to do is to sanitize and be clean. And if that is not possible, then they begin to, of course, live healthy lives. But what we notice, even with the COVID-19, is there are more people washing hands, there are more people sanitizing before they get into certain spaces. And that culture is slowly changing, even the way that we experience in certain spaces. People are now feeling more comfortable to go to certain areas and experience certain parts of the city because of the sanitization. And we're also looking at an opportunity that has been created in terms of increasing healthy lives. We all know that even people who are going to hospital right now have reduced because of that. And so architecture, in a way, plays a role in all these particular facets that I've talked about, and they're all very important. And I'm sure even as we continue to listen to the other presentations, a lot of this discussion come to the fore. And I believe if we get a little bit more time, even from here in Africa, we should be able to explore some of these conversations further down, and even describe some of the things that we're already doing here in Nairobi. Is that architects are also beginning to get into the conversation with regards to the health infrastructure that is being created, and trying to push for automation of systems, so people do not have to hold doors, and you can walk straight in there. Even at the AK, we produced a handbook talking about how schools should be open, how schools should be set up, how hospitals should be set up, how healthcare infrastructure should be set up. And those are some of the conversations we need to have. Architects in architecture. We should be pushing our conversations together. So I won't not say much. I'm standing in for Mogore, who's our president, and I believe she probably had prepared a much more in-depth conversation, but I believe at this time, this is what we're talking about. This is our current conversation within our country here in Kenya, and I believe if we get more time, we should be able to explore a lot more in regards to a healthy environment. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Florence. And thank you again for standing in as you did at the 11th hour. I understand that you're not going to stay with us for the remainder of the presentations. Anyway, again, thank you, and we wish you well, and hope all goes well with Muguru's health issues as well with their family. Thank you. See you again soon, hopefully. Moving on to our next presenter now. Next presenter is Z Smith. Z is a Principal and Director of Sustainability and Building Performance at Escu Dumais Ripple, winner of the 2014 ARA Firm Award. His built work includes academic, laboratory, and residential buildings, earning the LEED Gold and Platinum certification. He's winners of the RARC Green Building Award and the ARA COT Top 10. COT is Committee of the Environment. He brings training and experience in physics and engineering with a SCB in physics from MIT and a PhD in electrical engineering from Princeton to the field of architecture. He's got a MArch from UC Berkeley and is named as inventor of 10 patents and author of over 50 peer-reviewed scientific publications. He serves on the serves as the North American representative to the International Union of Architects Sustainable Development Commission, and has taught at the Tulane School of Architecture and has served on the National Advisory Group of the ARA Committee on the Environment, COT, as I said earlier, and as chair of the US Green Building Council Louisiana chapter. Z, over to you.
Thank you very much, Kevin. What I'd like to speak briefly on is to cover what I think is a really interesting transformation. For many years in sustainability, I've had a strong passion for reducing the climate change impact of buildings through their energy use. But what I have noticed over the last 5 years or so is that we are getting much more traction with clients by talking about health and the aspects of how green buildings generally can provide a positive impact on health for their occupants. That is getting greater traction with building owners and building developers. And so I think it's kind of a way forward. If we want to take action on climate change, we can do that in ways that advance human happiness by focusing on health. There was for a time, in a sense, a thought that these were in contradiction, that in the 1970s and 80s, early attempts to reduce energy use actually were about reducing the amount of fresh air being provided in buildings and so on, and insulating with materials that trapped pollutants. And so we ended up with the so-called sick building syndrome. However, today, the very things that provide a healthier environment for building occupants are also the things that allow the buildings to be more sustainable and more efficient. And this is never more true than in the age of COVID-19. So we'll give you some real world examples of how we're using this in our own practice and that of North American Architects applying it across the region. As has been covered by some of the previous speakers, there's sort of two ways to think about the interactions between buildings and health. They can make us sick through the impacts of the building on the occupants, such as the building of indoor carbon dioxide levels, the buildup of combustion products if people are using gas stoves and so on, the off-gassing or from the materials that we put in buildings, or the direct contact by touching those materials and their impacts on health. The extent to which the way we construct buildings promotes people to having a very sedentary lifestyle, sitting, taking the elevator, and so on. The extent to which building envelopes can trap moisture and then provide a growth medium for mold, which can have serious health impacts through things like asthma, and the extent to which we are limiting the access to natural light. So those are ways that buildings can make us sick for the people inside the buildings, but buildings can also make people sick on the outside through the pollution generated through the power used by buildings, through the pollution emitted in producing the construction materials. 11% of global carbon dioxide emissions are the buildings we're specifying each year for the construction of our buildings. And then the pollution emitted when we make our buildings such that the only way to get to them is to get in cars that use internal combustion and so on. So from the siting of buildings and so on, we can make a tremendous difference. So we can flip that script. And obviously inside the building, we can provide fresh air, we can eliminate combustion, we can use non-toxic materials, we can design things that make taking the stair much more inviting than taking the elevator. We can design building envelopes to prevent the buildup of moisture, and we can provide abundant natural light. And then when we look at the impact of our buildings outside, we can use we can design buildings to not use combustion and to only use pollution-free power, which can be generated on-site or can be generated off-site through relationships between the building owners and occupants and clean power generation. We can move to low carbon construction and non-toxic materials, and we can promote dense settlements that can be reached by walking, bike, or public transit. And so the misconception, again, I said, was that saving energy is a cause of sick buildings. Instead, we can, by adopting these strategies, and it's shown here by a multifamily unit, a place for families of sick children who are recovering in hospital to live in San Francisco, where the emphasis was on making the building a complete engine of health, of reinforcing health through everything, through access to light and air, materials choices, its location, its walkability, and so on. The other reality is that the standards in commercial buildings that have been set and residential buildings in the US and in standards that are widely adopted around how much fresh air per occupant should be provided when mechanical conditioning is used are really woeful, because they are based on the levels of fresh air necessary to keep it so that you can't smell any unpleasant odors. It has nothing to do, those standards were not based on studies of occupant health. We now have really great research, peer-reviewed research, that shows that what humans really need in terms of indoor air quality, they need at least twice the amount of fresh air as those ASHRAE standards that most of our energy codes are based on in North America. In fact, targeting a level for mechanically conditioned spaces of 20 liters per second. And of course, we can improve things by lowering the rate at which nasty things are being put into the air by specifying 0 VOC, volatile organic compound interiors. Those things have, through a series of peer-reviewed tests, shown to have significant improvements on cognitive function, on brain function of occupants, better sleep, and better health. We are implementing these now in our projects, and we're able to implement this higher level of air and airflow and so on, higher level of thermal comfort, and yet achieve energy use that is 70% less than that of a typical office building today. And so we find that this can be achieved in new construction, but we can also find that it can be achieved in deep renovation of existing buildings. This is a photograph from a project we're doing right now, doing a deep renovation of an office complex for an insurance company where they were disappointed they couldn't retain younger workers who, after working in an environment like this, would usually leave after a year or two. And we made the pitch that they could transform their interiors to one that was in an inviting place for people to be, again, at much higher air quality, much lower toxic materials, much better access to light and views. And through a series of actually cutting out space in their building, creating these double height spaces and making a place that was inviting, such that the president of the firm says her office is on the 7th floor, and she is walking to work, meaning she's walking through every department in her building on her way in. And so she gets greater visibility, but these double height daylit spaces draw people together. And so they both reinforce health and build community. Again, this is a deep retrofit of an existing building. We're achieving 70% energy savings, yet we're providing more than twice the standard levels of air at a high level of filtration. And then finally, in terms of housing, we're also seeing projects where through smart choices, we can provide healthy interiors, net zero energy, with on-site energy storage for added resilience. And we can build these at less than the average cost of typical construction. Now, none of this is free, but it's a matter of making smart choices. Again, low and no VOC interiors, operable windows, of course, and each dwelling unit has its own independent air supply, so we're not cross-contaminating between dwelling units. And this is achieved at what in a North American standard is a really remarkably low cost of construction. So the way forward, we think, for architects who, if you care about sustainability, lead with health. Building occupants prefer healthy buildings with better light, air quality, and comfort. The same measures that improve health can save energy and reduce pollution. And many building owners who are only marginally interested in sustainability are very interested in buildings that promote health. They have a higher market value, they can command better rents, and they expose them to less liability. And the cost premium for achieving this kind of performance and this kind of quality for building occupants is really less than you may think. Thank you.
Wonderful presentation. Thank you, Z. Looking into those buildings where you've done the work inside, I'm uncertain if they're all yours, but they're double volume spaces, and that really, really enhance the space. And you can see the light that's flowing in. I'll come to questions at the end. So thank you very much. And I'll move on to the next presenter. Next up, we have Peter de Jager. Peter is a registered professional architect and in full-time employment in the field of functional building infrastructure impacts at the Smart Places cluster of the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, known as the CSIR. The research interests include context-appropriate, evidence-informed approaches to promoting health and wellness in the built environment. Peter has a Bachelor of Architecture degree, followed by a master's degree in applied ethics. I might have some questions on ethics afterwards for professionals. She joined the CSIR in 2007 and is a research group leader, specializing in building design and engineering, particularly for social infrastructure. Her other interests in research include healthcare facility design, climate responsive design, tuberculosis transmission and mitigation, infection prevention and control, implementation support to government and capacity development. She has served as the chairperson of the South African Federation of Hospital Engineering. Peter de Jager, over to you. Your microphone may be muted.
Okay. Good afternoon from South Africa. It's a very beautiful, warm day here. I'm not going to do a survey of all the wonderful things you can do. I think the colleagues who went ahead of me have done a good job of that. But I want to think about how technology can aid us a bit, and to look at a proactive stance that maybe architects need to inculcate. So in 1851, a Florida doctor patented the first ice machine, and that was in an attempt to treat malaria patients with cool air. This technology, with origins in a motive to save lives and promote healing and health, gradually developed until it was used to cool entire buildings. And it's become a ubiquitous technology in building design and engineering, especially in the West. Now, air conditioning has been variously characterized as climate control, sinful, cool but dangerous, an agent of modernity, America's great hope for physical, mental, and moral progress. LaRue argues that an air conditioner is emblematic of an approach to building design which takes cognizance of physiological comfort, but with little care for other essential human needs. Proponents of air conditioning will point out the benefits to health, well-being, productivity, efficiency, and comfort. A recent American peer-reviewed article claims that 1 degree Fahrenheit hotter school year reduces learning by 1%, disproportionately impacting minority students and accounting for 5% of racial achievement gap. Proponents of air conditioning point out that productivity drops 2% for every 1 degree centigrade above the threshold, and can point to significant benefits from in terms of medicine and food security. Detractors of air conditioning will point to emissions, the harmful environmental effects of refrigerants, potential role in disease transmission, and the reduced natural ability of people's bodies to adapt to climate. Now, whereas the European and American markets are pretty well saturated with air conditioning, the industry is quite encouraged by an exponential increase in demand, which has been experienced in China and India, and is casting its eyes to Africa as a very great potential market, and forecasts growth in the 7 to 8% range over the next year, and escalating rapidly. These optimistic growth forecasts are predicated on population growths in the region, warmer climates, and by demonstrated increased trends in market demand. So whilst Africa is actually introducing policy and procedures to regulate uncontrolled imports to manage energy consumption and emissions, the forces of market push and pull seem to be very compelling. Indeed, Ghana's Department of Energy found over a decade, 3.7 million refrigerator units, including air conditioners, imported from Europe, 75% of which were secondhand, many obsolete materials and harmful, and at least a quarter of which were not working, in effect, dumping. So much of, architects can be sort of disinterested in air conditioning in some ways, because much of it is installed, especially in Africa, as retrofit, and where it is incorporated as part of capital work, it's often overlaid as a service by an engineer or a supplier whose fee structure perversely incentivizes overspecification of equipment rather than taking that knowledge and to influence the fundamentals of building design. So such approaches favor a standardized fit and forget philosophy, inappropriately universalized performance specifications, simplified standardized solutions, and they tend towards sealing of the building envelopes to pursue energy efficiency. Very few people will know that South Africa narrowly avoided sealing of buildings into its national building code fairly recently. So architects can be quite disinterested in this business of air conditioning, but given that market and push and pull in Africa, should there be? Because it might be a missed opportunity to promote healthy environments through architecture. Shouldn't a more proactive stance be taken? I will finish with a recent design of a clinic in the hot Karoo town of Beaufort West. The design, it's a really arid area and quite brutal, but the designers took every effort to try and make this innovative passive design methods to achieve comfortable indoor conditions. They've used rock stores, they've used a thermal chimney. It's a really interesting and beautiful design. But in the end, they had to top up with some air conditioning, heating and cooling. So in summary, you cannot bring a kind of religious fervor to wanting to avoid air conditioning fully in every situation. We do need to address each situation on a case-by-case basis. And to do so is actually quite difficult and technically intricate. And it requires reformulating the way many of us collaborate and design, but it shows great promise for healthy environments through architecture. And that is my story.
Thank you very much, Peter. Good presentation. You could unshare. Thank you very much. I always say, and for one who feels the heat, I always say that air conditioning was the best invention ever, even greater than the wheel. And I have air conditioning blowing on me at the moment, otherwise I'd be drenched. Durban also is very hot today, probably around about 80 degrees Fahrenheit, 27, I think, in Celsius, very hot day. Thank you again. On to our next speaker. No presentation, in my view, would be complete. Sorry, my dog's decided it's going to bark at someone now. Would be complete without a presentation from Mass Design. I've personally studied with Alan Ricks, the founder of Mass, and when they're both in Pretoria and over at the course at Harvard as well. And I'd asked Alan if he would be interested in doing the presentation. Because it's a bit early in the morning for him, I think we're very pleased to say that he's given the job to Andrew Brose, who is a lot closer to me at the moment and happens to be in Cape Town. So thank you too to Andrew for his presentation, which he'll be giving now. To introduce Andrew to you, Andrew Brose leads the South African studio of Mass Design Group, where he supports projects and business development across Africa. He originally joined Mass in 2010 as a design fellow in Rwanda, where he works on the design and construction of projects across the region, including the Umubano Primary School, Rubuga Primary School, Rutaru Doctors Housing, and Ringwingwayu Village Housing. In 2014, Andrew moved to the DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo, to serve as the project manager for the Lima Conservation School, where he supervised the construction, management, and documentation of the unique engagement process. He received a Master's of Science in Architecture and Building Technology from MIT, where he was the recipient of the TATA or Tata Center Fellowship and the 2018 Tucker Voss Award for Building Technology. Andrew completed his Bachelor of Architecture degree at the University of Oregon. Andrew, I'm hoping your pronunciation of the name will be better than mine. Over to you.
Maybe that's a lesson to add some pronunciation to the for my intro in the future. I'll make sure to include that. Thanks for the quick introduction, and thank you for everyone joining. I wanted to start with a little bit of an intro to Mass for those who are new to the firm, and then jump into some of our recent work in providing guidelines in the recent pandemic. I think actually this has been said to some degree on this call so far, but we firmly believe that architecture is never neutral. That can either heal or can hurt. I think Thomas has said as well that we need to be proactive in thinking about how architecture can be positive in different ways. We are a mission-driven organization. We use research, building, and advocacy for design that promotes health, justice, and human dignity. We are over 120 architects, landscape architects, engineers, writers, filmmakers, researchers. We represent more than 20 countries across the world. We support not-for-profits, foundations, and communities to amplify their mission through the built environment. We started in Kigali in Rwanda just over 10 years ago and have since grown with projects and offices across the globe. Our firm seeks to promote equity and inclusion, not only through the work we do, but also through our staffing and leadership. We are very intentional in the way we operate our organization and the way we work as a horizontal design collective. Our seminal project, the Butaro District Hospital in the north part of Rwanda, asks the question, how can the design of a hospital maximize health outcomes and redefine expectations for care? We engage in infection control principles, looking at what we can do to protect ourselves as individuals, what we can do to impact change to make our facilities safer, how can we transform an institution to be better prepared for the next crisis? And these questions are the kinds of things we use in every project to define what it means to be successful. And so we are looking at our work through myriad of lenses and metrics to ensure that we're promoting and designing for our community with maximum impact. We're often working with inadequate utilities or backup power. Passive controls are imperative to maintain proper air change, especially for patient wards and isolation spaces. I think among all the things that we've experienced over the past half year, we've been proven right in this one that I just mentioned, that buildings hurt and buildings heal. Again, I think it was mentioned earlier that that access to sunlight and air is one of the primary and most important things of the work that we do as architects. We woke up on a Monday morning in March and suddenly the world felt and knew this and realized that our buildings were actually having an impact in how we were thinking about the quality of air and light, and we were spending more time in certain spaces and thinking about these facilities. The buildings around us provide shelter and care, but they can also cause injury and pain. If architecture is deployed as an active agent in the fight against the coronavirus pandemic, we think that we can recapture trust over our public spaces and solve problems. Spatial choices we make today during the emergency might make or break our ability to survive both this crisis and the next one. So as this pandemic took shape, we asked ourselves, what is our role in teaching spatial literacy, or how people read space and interpret space and use that space? And how can it be key in keeping people safe moving forward? We, early in March, began to rapidly reach out to our partners to ask how we could provide support. Many of our partners in public health, emergency care, infection control. And one of those first partners was the Boston Healthcare for the Homeless group in New England, where we provided design consultation for temporary facilities with consideration towards testing, isolation, and caring for some of our most vulnerable. And that resulted in some designs and spaces for these temporary facilities, but very quickly led into a series of guidelines which we produced and had made available on our website, both for our partners. And we realized from these efforts that the expertise we have in our office from working in regions dealing with infectious diseases, we were apt to develop a series of documents to share both within our network and with the general public as restaurants, schools, offices, and cities shifted the way people engage with one another on a daily basis. Simple diagrams such as these can often help convey the importance for hard barriers at thresholds, which had previously been fluid, or methods for donning and doffing personal protective equipment at appropriate times and locations. And oftentimes just having a client flow or an employee flow can help prevent unnecessary infection. COVID, I think we all recognize, has only further emphasized the inequalities within our own society, and our material on healthy housing for Native communities, which was put together by our lab in Santa Fe, our Sustainable Native Communities Lab, outlined response and recovery, which addressed historical injustices of communities who have struggled to access affordable, quality healthcare in the United States for centuries. And so we found it not only important to discuss matters of health, but also societal health, and begin to, or continue to engage in conversations which we think are relevant today. Beginning, I think one of the first partners we had in this response in New York, shortly after the shelter-in-place order by a governor with the Mount Sinai Hospital transforming its entire care delivery system and research enterprise. Mount Sinai in Upper Manhattan was provided care to more than 600 patients each day, more than 150 of whom were intensive care or on ventilators. In a span of less than 3 weeks, clinical operations and facilities team can carry out significant facilities modifications to adapt their spaces. And this is something we're, again, very familiar with, is the adaptation and engagement with clinicians and health professionals to understand how the space is working or it's not working, and then think about how we might adapt that. So despite sort of their immediate reactions, clinicians remained under immense pressure in these clinical care environments. Patients were critically ill, and the death rate amongst those in the ICUs was devastating to families and healthcare teams. Historically, we know that the leading cause of medical events are human factors, such as overburdened clinicians and overburdened staff, and failures of communication network or teamwork. Nowhere is there really a more critical consideration than in high pressure, rapidly changing situations like the current COVID-19 care delivery context. And so we engage with the staff there to analyze space and to engage and rethink how we might be able to put in some direct measures. And our conclusions suggested that infection control protocols, which were quickly constructed, but these medical facilities were still not configured to adapt easily to the rigid adherence protocols. So many professionals and facilities are continuing to adapt in situ. We've consulted even with some partners here in South Africa, as well as from our partners in Rwanda. So amongst all these heroic efforts, I think of our healthcare teams, our findings show that these adaptations can vary floor to floor and unit by unit, depending on who's leading that space. And therefore, there's an introduction of variables that risk infections of staff, patients, and simple visual aids and designs such as these are intended to simplify visual protocols and provide visual protocols to easily adapt and increase adherence, and thus reducing nosocomial infections or hospital-borne infections among staff and patients. Of these different documents, which are available, as I said, on our website, we've seen that over 20,000 of them were downloaded. And this type of effort is how MASS has chosen to respond to issues of human health, which have been ignored for too long, we believe. And we hope that as more people learn to understand the impacts of the space they inhabit, positive or negative, that the demand for better design, which promotes justice and dignity, grows. And we're excited to continue these conversations with our partners and continue to publish these different documents. So feel free to check out our website or some of our other work and the research that we have available, and feel free to reach out to me with any other questions. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Very good presentation. Nice to see some of your work again. I've seen quite a bit of it before. Thank you again. I'll move on to our next speaker, who is Alice Leong Hek Lian, graduated from the University Science of Malaysia, USM, with double degrees in Bachelor of Science, HBP Honours in Architecture, and the Bachelor of Architecture. She is the manager of Architect MMA and is an experienced practicing architect registered with the Board of Architects in Malaysia, LAM. She is currently the Honorary Treasurer of the Malaysia Institute of Architects, PAM. She is appointed to the UIA's SDG Committee for Region 4, and is also a committee member of the Architects Regional Council of Asia, ARCASIA, the Green and Sustainable Architecture Committee, and Zone B representative. She is a qualified GBR facilitator, a GBR accredited panelist, and a qualified registered professional interior designer, accredited building inspector, and arbitrator under PAM's panel list. Alice, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelvin. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all the participants. And thank you to UIA for inviting me to be presented in this prestige platform. So today's, we've been hearing the colleagues before me have been sharing all about the points that how to go about for the green and sustainable, and as well as to create a more healthy environment. So I've been thinking, because we are all in the same pandemics, it's become a popular topic nowadays, and we are believing that everyone is keep looking for a way out and also an idea that how to move from here and to the futures. So I've been thinking, same happens to me, that I've been thinking the same. First of all, we have to take what are the challenges actually faced. So since I'm looking at all the panelists that I'm the only one represent, I think, in the Asia region. So I'm going to talk focusing on the challenges that happens around in my big regions over here. So during this pandemics, we know that it is based on the observation. We saw that all of us, it's very difficult, and it takes a longer time for us to actually get out to our so-called addicted, as usual, old habits. You know, people from that we are all okay to be locked down for the first time, but when the second wave or the third wave hit back, and it seems like it's rather impossible to get people to go back and lock down in the house again. So people are actually desperate to get out, to meet together, to have a social interactions. So these are the things that, because we are a community that we never actually live alone. We are living in a group. So it is pretty good, difficult to actually to stop that. So these are the challenges that we have to look at how to come over that. At the same time, in this pandemics, I believe everyone in the whole world started to realize that spaces for the movement for emergency users are become very limited and is actually insufficient. So this end up people have to start to explore using the stadiums, the open car park lots to actually transform into some emergency spaces, and as well as to cater other social problems, you know. And we do aware that actually in this pandemic, in the lockdown, and the percentage of the case abusers in the domestic houses has been increased as well. And all these victims have no way to get out from all these places. So these are the problems that we really have to think of how to move on from now as well as future. So again, in a very congested community, especially in areas that where all the slums and also the low-income workers, where they live in the squatters and flats, where their rooms itself is very narrow with very poor ventilations. It's too congested, and everybody is compact in one small little room. So you can see some of the photos around here that some show in Singapore, in Hong Kong, as well as Manila, in Jakarta, and even in Malaysia too. We have facing a problem that in the maternities hospital ward, mothers and the babies have to share the bed, because bed has actually giving advance the priority to the COVID-19 patients. So how are we going to look into that? How will this pandemics or post-pandemics, healthy buildings or a built environment will they look like? So in future, all our living habitable areas will be reflect the recent needs. If you look back the histories of all the pandemics happens in 100 years and years and ago. So what we having here and what we built around here for our own building, even the built environment, is actually the result from the post-pandemics before. So in here, we are facing a more challenging, smartest virus. So it's the time for us to actually to upgrade into something else. So now we are looking at the current need is actually to meet the criteria of contactless environments as well as the social distancing. But to remember that we have to also try to meet that people have to get the social interaction. So that is a challenge, and how we're going to implement into the upcoming built environment. So nowadays, if you look slowly, people also started to actually prefer the psychologist ways. They started to prefer actually to stay at a landed property instead of high-rises building. Well, previously you don't feel that, but now you are locked down in a so-called apartment or smaller or flat and all those things, and your movement of the spaces and everything is trying to constrain. It stops you to go out for jogging and so on and so forth, all the activities. So now there's a lot of people in the psychologist way now. They will start to prefer to stay in the landed properties, and also there are a group of people also start to look for the options to stay away from the congested cities, or perhaps have to move up to the more less congested rural areas. So for doing all this, we have to, as an architect, we have to really look into a way to incorporate the flexibilities into our design built environments, well, without making the COVID-19, because I do believe that this pandemic is, when it ends, maybe in another 100 years or whatever, it will have another one, you know, is it's just like recycle things is come back and again. So we always have to prepare for that. Is a change is good, that it makes humans progress and improve our life qualities. So don't make the COVID-19 as a focus for the projects, but we have to actually incorporate the flexibilities into our design. That is the challenge, the architects for innovations that we have to build and help to the entire world. It's not just for one country. So now we have to look into that the elements that already have around our lifestyle, our community, such as the automatics, doors, the touch-free faucet, plenty of outdoor spaces, extra bicycle provisions, and as our colleagues before say that the art of ventilation system must be improved a lot, is a must. So, well, here I'm going to share some of the ideas that I've been exploring for this past half a year. Yeah. So I'm trying to get a way that how we can actually look into whatever we already have, maybe improve and make it something else to cater for this so-called pandemics, post-pandemics buildings and built environment. So one of them I look at it is actually the sustainable industrial built systems. So we call it IBS systems, or you can be prefabricated. So before that, we already since that you have a Kyoto design in much earlier in Japan, that people use it actually again for the previous pandemics for the health facilities, where this module itself consists about like 6 panels. It's very flexible. You can just mental it, and within 1 day you can done and finish it and come with all the basic and essential facilities to take care for the pandemic. And now in the year 2020, you can see the same things, that almost the same concept that has been implemented in China. So the most famous is actually the Huashan hospitals that they completed within 10 days, and about 1,000 beds for all these patients who suffer from the COVID-19. So what is actually benefits for this system itself, because it can be constructed in a virtual construction, duration, fast delivery, and more efficiency. And furthermore, it's very easy to construct, easy to dismantle, and you can be actually recycle, reuse it after sanitize, and then always prepare for another function or usage, or actually you can use it for another pandemic in future. So that is one of the way actually you can look into that. The next one, I'll call it a self-modular concept for house and residential. Basically I'm looking into a main 2 trends that you need a workspace at home now. So for instance, now in Malaysia, we're actually facing the 3rd wave, and I'm starting to work at home again. So today we have about like 1,200 over new cases. So it's upbreaking numbers, and it's crazy. So we have no choice that it's really you need a proper workspace at homes, and you need a privacy, because in the house, in your home itself is not, if you're a bachelor, that's a different story, but you're saving families, all of them have their different activities conducted at the same time. So these are the main key trends that we really have to look into that. And the environment that you also have to push into the so-called the new normal world. So this system, the cell modular system itself is, I call it serve as the autonomous residence. Is always equipped with all the essentials and basic facilities, such as your solar panels on top of the roof, the rainwater harvesting system and purification systems. The water basically is actually harvested for your own daily usage, as well as to cooling down the building or heating out the buildings for the country that have different seasons. For instance, in Malaysia, we only 365 days, summers and rainy days, so we do not really need a heating system, but we need more for a cooling system itself. So these are the criteria that is we look at as a main essentials to support our basic life needs. So perhaps this, I look at it, could be another options that we can really work it from now and also for future. And as well, I think it is space saving. The best is that this modular system, that if is already happens in some of the places. It's just that people just use it for something special. But now I think this is maybe perhaps the right time we can look into it and how make it more flexible to actually to move around. The next one is almost like the concept like the four papers. We call it origami. I call it flexibilities of the space usage model. Also, all these things. If you remember, there was a movie many years back. It's called Fifth Elements, and you still can remember Corbin Dallas' house. His home itself is quite. It's a very flexible and walkable multi-purpose spaces, I call it, and because it is more energy saving for all the spaces resources. So it is always a way for us to look at into that in a modular, but you can arrange in a more safe spaces, and you can use it for many other things. So it avoids and also reducing over expenditures and costs, as well as improving the strengths of the society resilience. So this is not actually for one single residence, but you can see some of the pictures that shows that you can actually, it's almost like the previous the model is said, but you can actually start it and work out the all sort of shapes and combinations for that. So the next one, I think I start to look, do some research, and I discovered that actually there's one architect, Piero Lizoni from US. He has a concept for this skyline. I find it quite it's pretty cool itself that this is one solely one building, but actually it consists of all the functions, all the communities needs is on in solely in one building. So it consists of schools, it consists of offices, co-working spaces, residential, hospital, healthcare, soilless farms, greenscapes, and etc. So I call it Independence Community Module. So this building itself, again, it will be equipped with all the facilities. Solar PV is definitely a need. Rainbow harvesting. Then we talk about greenery. So with this actually independent, self-sustained community modules, building itself is easily to be turned into a lockout area. You don't have to actually going out, but the whole building itself is really served like an independence community. So the concept is like the ground floor and the few floors below that are using for public culture facilities, and the floors above that start to change into a soilless farms for education hubs, emergency healthcare facilities, and offices, co-working spaces, floors above, and finally it's a residential. So this is the one that I'm trying to combine with all the concepts that has been sharing in front. So this is the one that I've been working together with my colleagues in Malaysia. They are from O2DA Architects. So this is actually a concept that we presented for the competitions for the so-called pandemic proof. So this itself is actually a more futuristic, and I call it a flexible plug-ins structure itself. Eventually, the whole city itself will be lifted from the ground, and the grounds are all the forests and greenery and vegetations. So basically, each of the module itself is flexible to move on, and eventually families or living spaces is all in a capsule. And if you're all aware, actually in Dubai they already start to develop some capsules to travel from one place to another places by using a capsule. So these kind of systems we actually adapt into this concept here. So eventually all the capsule itself is family that can actually travel around within the cities. So each of the tower itself is the sustainable independent cities by itself. So again, it is more freedoms to form it, and the flexibilities for that. So last but not least,
I'm joining Alice, if you can just finish that.
Thank you. So I think that's about it. Thank you, Kevin.
Thanks very much, Alice. Thank you for a good presentation. Just looking at some of your images there reminds me of a talk we did recently on the difference of spaces that people have and the confinement that we've all been under. So some people have really confined spaces, many people living in one small room in certain instances. So people's spatial usage and availability is so varied. And I was also reminded when I saw your image of a person doing yoga. We had started doing yoga for the first 3 weeks of our lockdown. Didn't last very long, and I now have some dieting to do to get back to some sort of shape again. So, yeah, so I think everyone's spatial availability is a big difference, and that's really where we need to start. So thank you very much again. On to our final speaker, and as I said earlier on, Ray was the person that really inspired me to look at doing this webinar. So I'll introduce Ray to you. Ray Pentecost is the director of the Center for Health Systems and Design in the Texas A&M University College of Architecture, and holds the Ronald L. Skaggs and Joseph G. Sprague Chair of Health Facilities Design. Ray also holds joint appointments in the TAMU School of Public Health. He is a fellow in both the American Institute of Architects, AIA, and the American College of Healthcare Architects. A former licensed long-term care administrator, a lead accredited professional, and an ordained minister. Ray is the current director of the UIA Public Health Group. He is the past president of the American College of Healthcare Architects and two-time past president of the AIA Academy of Architecture for Health, past president of the International Academy for Design and Health, and a past co-chair of the American Institute of Architects, America's Design and Health Initiative. Ray, over to you. I think you might be on mute.
Sharing, unmute, and go back. All right, can everybody see me now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great, thanks. Well, this has been fun to listen to and energizing and exciting. And I have to say, before I go any further, everybody that's on this panel, you need to get involved with the public health group. We need your voice, we need your insights. And for anybody tuning in, we want to have you involved with the UIA Public Health Group as well. Let me jump in. I want to take healthy environments from a slightly different perspective. I want to suggest that we have some challenges ahead of us or opportunities, and I want to just put them in perspective. That's all. I think we are poised either to catch a really, really exciting wave and ride it with great style, or if we're not careful, to be overwhelmed and crushed by that wave. There's a statement by somebody that you may know, Ray Kurzweil. Ray is, if you don't know Ray, you certainly know his company. Ray was hired by Google in about 2012. And Ray has suggested that health and medicine is information. I want to talk about that information today. One of the presenters earlier said that we need to have data-driven solutions. The data is going to drive us forward. Let's talk about that data for just a minute and put that in perspective. This may be a familiar sight to you, that health determinants come from all over the spectrum. You can see the environment is at least a piece of it. We have some voice in that. Medicine, very small part. Genetics, social, behavior. These are all contributing to our health, and design impacts all of those. And they all generate lots of different, very diverse data sets, which, if we are to design for health and do it in some sort of comprehensive, robust, rigorous way, we need to have information from all of these different perspectives woven into our design and ultimately our design's performance. Let's talk about the magnitude of that challenge. I'm going to walk you through 4 stages from left to right, and we'll do it very quickly in the interest of time. The first stage that we're in right now is proliferation. That's what makes this a timely talk. We happen to be alive and practicing right at the moment where things are exploding in the world of data. Hasn't been like that in the past, and we're going to have strategies going forward. But right now, things are exploding. We need to see that happening. For example, you may have seen this projection by 2020. Well, that's where we are. Medical knowledge will start doubling every 73 days. Does anybody find that just amazing and a little overwhelming? Physician currency. Watson, the IBM project, the supercomputer, they looked at the amount of information being generated globally in health and healthcare and said, well, if you want to stay current as a physician, the 24-hour day is gone. You need 29 hours a day to stay current with the information. Now let that play out for just a moment. What does that say about the person to whom you're going for medical care? If it took 29 hours a day to stay current, what does that say about what's happening in that encounter? 2025, not far off, the trillion sensor economy, it's being called. When we have 100 billion connected devices with at least a dozen sensors on each, what are they sensing? The environment, our behavior, our biometrics, activity patterns, weather patterns, indoor air quality, exterior air quality, all of these sensors. Where's all that information going? The Watson project suggests that for each individual, everybody on this call, everybody globally, 300 million books of personal health data will be generated in the near term. That's the volume of data that we're talking about for us. Kurzweil, again, suggesting that, and he's got a remarkable record for predicting things that actually do happen. By the 2030s, we'll connect our neocortex in our brains directly to the cloud. The monitoring for our health, the monitoring of what's going on in our bodies, where we are, it'll all be geo-tracked. Think about this, the mid-30s, those are the kids that are in elementary school right now, graduating medical school. How many medical schools right now are training doctors for 24/7 continuous data monitoring in their practice? The new medical schools that are coming online have got a completely new paradigm to consider. Now, in the midst of that proliferation, we have to do something about analytics. They've got to be integrated. They've got to be powerful. If we're going to see health in terms of the 5 main categories of influence that we talked about, and the unspeakable volumes of data that are being generated around each one. There's a story that I can tell you, and I won't tell you the long version. The short version is one of my colleagues is at A&M building the next generation computer. And it's a very simple mission. We have to build a computer that's 1 million times faster than the fastest computer around today. Why? Because the large data sets that they're aware of, one in particular, and just a 10-year data set, looking at lots and lots of data that needs to be integrated and put in terms of each other. All of those data sets would take 1 million years to run on today's fastest computer. So the mission is we need a computer that's 1 million times faster than what we've got just to be able to do data analysis in real time. Did you think about the problem being that big to have the data that we need to do good design? Not saying we have to have that volume of data to do good design, but to see the integrated picture of our work, that's where we're headed. Now, we can move toward patterns in data. New insights can be very energizing, very enlightening, but they can be overwhelming. And that's where artificial intelligence can play a role. But artificial intelligence isn't the end-all answer. We need to understand its limits. For example, artificial intelligence is about patterns. It's about pattern recognition, statistical probabilities. One of the most common weaknesses is it tells you what's going on. It tells you what the pattern is. But unless the data happens to have it, it can't tell you the how and the why. That's the shortfall of AI. It can tell you what's going on, but it often is very, very limited on the why and how. For example, in the US, I'm told FDA will not accept AI alone as the argument for a new pharmaceutical because it won't tell you how it works. You have to go back and do the basic studies on the mechanism that's working in that pharmaceutical. Even though AI can tip you off to a pattern that may have promise. So then lastly, we're moving from the happen to be alive at a time when data is exploding. The ability to interconnect them with new computing is right on the horizon. The use of AI, artificial intelligence, to see patterns, leaving us still wanting to know how and why and how do we use it. That leaves us at the precision mark. This is where we have to get to. And the AI shifts in the last stage from artificial intelligence to augmented intelligence. This is where we can get some pretty exciting design tools. Augmented intelligence would take Watson's 29-hour digest, which, by the way, it can do the whole world's update on new clinical discoveries, new medical information, in about the time it takes you to drink a cup of coffee. It can do that. And then if it were to just download all of that to a clinician right now, the clinician would just be overwhelmed. The fact that it's been digested isn't the issue. What we need with augmented intelligence is for the AI systems to become smart enough to say, well, on that patient, given what I learned last night, this is a new piece of information that's important for what you're doing. It's relevant to what you're doing, and it's innovative. It's beyond where you are. The connections are going to matter, but it's going to be about relevant, important, innovative information, not just lots of it. Lastly, an illustration. Watson was asked to look at 1,000 patients in the United States and to review cancer patients, review their treatment. And in reviewing their treatment, they found over 300 patients, 30%, could have been handled differently. Watson identified a different or new or innovative treatment for 30% of those patients. That's an example of having lots of information and then targeting the download in an augmented intelligence model. Just imagine what could happen if we can integrate the social and behavioral and environmental and genetic and clinical information together to a person who is 24/7 linked to the cloud. And we can begin to understand human behavior, human health, human reactions in terms of all of these other variables, such that when you're designing for a certain client, a certain population, a certain activity, we can turn to the augmented intelligence tools and say, what are the design features that would make that environment most effective, most successful, most productive? That's an exciting time, and we're right on the start of it. So as I close, we're poised. We need to make some decisions about research agendas, how we're going to proceed, how we're going to collect it, what information is worth collecting, what we're planning to do with it, how will we use it. It's about capacity. And if we're not careful, the capacity of what we are capable of collecting will overwhelm our capabilities to analyze it and make it useful as we design for health. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Ray. Excellent presentation, and got us all thinking, I'm sure. And as you said earlier, I'm sure you've signed up all these people. You've been taking down a list of names and contacts, and the Paris office will forward those to you. I'm sure they'll all enjoy being a part of your. This Watson, I'm sure, is not elementary whatsoever. And I was interested that you said by, I think, 2030, you said that we were all going to be, our minds would be linked to a cloud. And it'd be a bit scary as well, but it would sure help with some Wi-Fi connections as we've experienced during the day today. So thank you very much. And you've actually rounded up the speakers for today, and I'll go to a few questions, if I may. We've got about, 16 minutes left, so I'm going to have to ask for quick answers to these questions. I'll go to in order of our speakers. Brigitte, you were talking earlier about good health and well-being, and you were saying, I think earlier to me, that we're quite reactive in regard COVID. Are you able to give us any ideas? You mentioned partnerships. Any other ideas on how we can be more proactive?
Well, I think actually we saw a number of projects amongst my fellow panelists that are taking proactive or making proactive design. Alice is the most recent of the list, but there were other proactive approaches. it was more of a reminder, because I do find the discussion being very reactive at the moment. But we have, as Ray is saying, we're well poised to think ahead. Ray was commenting on data, but we're very well poised to look at the practice of architecture and our knowledge, and be more proactive in what we do. What I do notice, and I'm sure everyone else is noticing it, is the heightened interaction between those who study human behavior and those who know how to configure the built environment. And I think this really brings us back to urban design, which is very cross-disciplinary, or urbanism. So I think this is a very good signal. That's what I have to say now, if it made any sense.
Thanks very much, Regisa. Now a question for Marianne and Suzanne. How do you think that architecture and engineering can respond in a responsible way to these health issues that we're experiencing in all types of buildings? There's been varied building types spoken about today. Us as architects and engineers, we should be responsible. And how do you see we can be more responsible?
Yeah, I think the architects and engineer, they have a big role to play. We saw it all along the presentation today. But I want to say that they shouldn't be alone. I mean, like contractors, the one who decide and pay for buildings, need to be really involved in this health design. But of course, you can ask for engineer specialized in health, like we're doing in medical. The point is that you will have someone checking all along the project for the health, because architects and engineers also have a lot to deal with. So as specialists, it's we put a lot of attention to the projects. And I just want to finish that often regulation is not enough. We have the opportunity to use some certification like WELL, FitWell, or Osmos that are a good way to point out all the efforts that were made on projects.
Thank you very much. Perhaps a joint question for both Z and for Peter, links to ventilation in buildings. And I'm reminded, Peter will know about the research that I was involved in, partly with her organization down at hospitals in Cape Town. And in Cape Town, the weather can be really horrible, and putting it bluntly. The hospitals that we did research in had natural ventilation, openable windows. Some of them, there was a reliance in one of the two that we researched on mechanical ventilation. And then in the other one, there was a strong push to try and make use as much as possible on natural ventilation, but just obviously in theaters, operating theaters and whatever, where you needed filtration to make use of mechanical ventilation. What we found for example, in the male medical ward, this is mainly a TB hospital, or the areas we were researching were for TB. We found that largely the isolation rooms were sited near to the nurses' stations. And if the windows were open, in the strong winds that they get in Cape Town, that the wind would come right in through the window and obviously work its way through the building, but would also come back under the door in the greater strength than what the mechanical ventilation was able to extract air at. And so putting the nursing staff almost directly outside the door at great risk. So I wanted to highlight a bit about what Z had said about natural ventilation. Just ask for further input perhaps, and also link to Peter's conversation on air conditioning.
Sure. Well, I think there's an important distinction to make, and we could also loop in Andrew Brose if that made sense, because the Butaro District Hospital famously having mechanical conditioning in the operating theater and then natural ventilation throughout. I think the the important thing is that, 99.9% of the built environment is not operating theaters or isolation wards. And so when we're advocating for natural ventilation, it's for all the spaces that people routinely live in. And it's also true, as someone who lives in New Orleans, where we like to say that the air is so humid that if you can't see the air, don't trust air you can't see. So we're used to great humidity, and while we had a rich, thriving culture before the introduction of air conditioning, certainly it's undeniable the comfort it can bring. So the real point is to give people choice, and to give people, when you're in a situation of mechanical conditioning, enough fresh air that it works well with the needs of humans. And so all that research showing that the level of fresh air that you need for good cognitive function is we need to keep indoor carbon dioxide levels below around 650 parts per million. Intriguingly, all of the new guidance out of Harvard and some of the other studies within the North American context is that for bringing people back to work safely and reopening schools safely, they advocate a combination of a high level of filtration and achieving keeping the supplying enough fresh air, because the rate at which people are exhaling, perhaps potentially infected people are exhaling, is proportional to their carbon dioxide. And so you can use CO2 as a tracker for how well you're flushing the air. And so they're advocating for basically monitoring your fresh air system to keep that indoor CO2 level at, say, 650 parts per million or less. And so I think all these things work together. I think that the design of healthcare facilities, and specifically patient wards and operating facilities, is very specialized. But I think that what our focus needs to be looking out from here is designing indoor environments that reinforce health for everybody. Peta or Andrew, perhaps you'd have something more to add.
Andrew had to leave us, so he's apologized. Peta?
Okay. Yes, it's interesting because what Z said in his earlier presentation around the ASHRAE guidance and how it was invented is quite an interesting history, actually. And we came independently to a similar conclusion, including that air changes per hour, which is the way that we generally talk about exchange in buildings and measure it, is actually not really the right sort of metric, because you're not taking into consideration the occupancy. So the liters per second per person thing is actually, should be more about the sort of way that we're looking and thinking about these things. And then one of the participants here has reminded me of our particular situation where we have really a very poor track record in maintaining buildings. And we in South Africa, probably elsewhere in the world, maintenance isn't sexy. It's unfortunate because we need to provide lots of jobs here. We have a very high unemployment rate, and it occurs to me that maintenance, especially of building and so on, is a really great source for sustainable job development. But until we actually have the capacity, the skills, the knowledge and interest to maintain, operate, build, design systems correctly, I think that in many senses the sort of old-fashioned techniques are actually quite dependable, and we can do well to learn from the past and not to forge forward and copy some practices that are elsewhere in the world. So what I think we miss maybe a little bit, and maybe what might be helpful with a forum like this, is the advocacy part. It's the part about making people who commission buildings, who pay for them, smarter clients, so that they're asking for the right things. And when it comes to the maintenance stage of the building, they're not naive about what it takes to actually maintain a building. And I think that's where architects can play a great role. It's in making better clients. That's me.
I think
Thanks.
just to close on that, the idea is it's important for architects to ask that systems that when working with engineers, that they specify systems that fail gracefully, because all these systems work great in principle. It's just some of them are more prone to needing perfect maintenance. And when they aren't maintained perfectly, they fail spectacularly with impact for health. And so if we find systems that fail more gracefully, that the operable window is the ultimate escape hatch from a mechanical system that's not ventilating correctly, it puts power back in people's hands.
Thanks. Thank you both. We are running out of time, and just to answer a question earlier, as you spoke about CO2 as being a good marker, that research we did in those 2 hospitals in Cape Town used exactly that. And what we found is that it was generally safe, other than, as I described earlier, but the most risky or the greatest concentration of CO2 happened to be in the staff rooms. And that's right. It's found to be the most dangerous.
Luckily, no one goes there.
Just a quick question for Alice on flexibility. You spoke about flexibility as being important. We saw that in your presentation. Do you want to add anything else, Alice, on the flexibility?
I think from now, the flexibilities that we had to do is actually among all of us. We really have to loosen our grips to get up from our old as usual habits and the way of our very conventional way of business doing things. We had to get it out, and with all the fully equipped techniques and technologies, just move out and do some things for better things. We can do it, you know. We just have to be smart and get it out, be brave.
Thank you very much, Alice. Ray, I had discussed with you earlier being able to have a kind of summary of things related to the public health group. Have you got anything you want to add, bearing in mind that Thomas will be getting the vote of thanks shortly after? Ray, you unmute.
Now I know, I know, I saw it. I was talking to myself knowing I was muted. Sorry. Okay, some wrap-up comments. One, clearly everybody is dialed into the fact that this is a multidisciplinary subject and that the disciplines need to be integrated. One of the comments had to do with the architect as the synthesizer or the integrator. Absolutely, I think probably our overarching role as design professionals is to integrate disciplines into singular solutions. Data will drive us forward. Rigizzi, am I saying it right? I'm trying. Rigizzi and others even referenced data as being critical. Data-driven solutions. We have to have the data, and getting it more and more and more is going to be a management issue, but it's a worthwhile cause. The call for more research, evidence-based design. Everybody's talking about data-driven solutions. They need to. That's the way forward. Part of the challenge, Z, you talked about this a lot, overcoming preconceptions that things can be done innovative and they don't have to necessarily cost a lot more or not work as well. We have to educate our clients. We have to lead with health, as you put it, and help our clients understand the power of what they can do. I'll leave you with this quote. It wasn't mentioned today, but it came to mind often as I was listening. Richard Jackson is an American physician, and he's the only physician that was ever a member of the AIA board of directors. And he's famous for speaking to audiences on design, asking this question: do architects realize that they are health professionals? And he gives the audience a moment to pause and absorb that. Then he smiles and looks at him and says, they should, because they are. And we need to think of ourselves in that capacity. We really are health professionals creating places that impact people's health. Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you, Ray. Thanks for that summation. I was on another webinar, I think it was yesterday, and it was also very similar to what you've just summed up in saying the important role of the architect being this multidisciplinary person, being able to know so much about, or having to know so much about every aspect of the disciplines that go into a building or into space or into design. Our role is critical, and I think we may have lost some ground in that field, and we need to work at clawing that back again and rise to the top. Thank you all. We run out of time. I'm going to hand over for the vote of thanks to our president again, Thomas Fournier. But just before I do, I'd like to thank everyone. And I will let me speak opposite. Thomas, over to you, and I'll let you say the vote of thanks, and I'll then thank everyone thereafter.
I also extend my thanks to all involved. A very informative session. I end where I began. I think the current conditions of the pandemic are such that we are not widely acknowledging the role of indoor air in propagating the disease and infecting people. And that is a serious problem, one which is increasingly acknowledged, I think, in the scientific community, but not reflected in the guidance and messages coming from the bureaucratic elements in society that are supposedly responsible for public health. So I reiterate my feeling that the architectural community, our colleagues in engineering and the health fields can help to ensure that one of the missions we have, which is to undertake research and to use the results of that research, are applied in this area. We have this mission in trying to counteract the pandemic, and I think that's important. We've also heard a lot about technology from Ray Pentecost and others. We've heard something also about, I think, the importance of returning to basics. I started with sunlight and air. I think Regitza and others added water. I should have thought of that. And I really do believe that this is an area that's of enormous importance and opportunity to the profession of architecture and to all of us as citizens. So I think I ask you to redouble your efforts, and I thank you for the wonderful insights you've presented today.
Thank you, Thomas. Thank you for being with us today and for summing up. Also, thanks to all the speakers. Thanks to the IFHP for partnering with us in this event. Without you, as you know, wouldn't have happened. So that's really grateful for you coming on board. My special thanks go to the UIA office staff, to Moriarty, Sonia, and Paula, who have been working tirelessly behind the scenes. Without you, this wouldn't have happened. Much appreciated. And then to the UTC people themselves for allowing us to do this presentation. And last but not least, to all that tuned in today. Our numbers weren't that great. I asked the staff to lie to me if we were under 50. I thought, fortunately, we got over 50. Very valuable inputs today, and I think that the discussion is worth continuing. There were a few questions I saw raised, or conversations rather raised in the Q&A, which we will process through the office and then get back to you, and you can get hold of us via the UIA office email address, UIA Architects. So if you go into the website, you'll see a connection there, and we'll be able to feedback any questions that have been asked. So this is it. We've just run over the 2 hours, 2 hours and 3 minutes. This was misguided. And so thank you all. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Nice to speak to you all, and thank you for such a valuable input. Blessings to you all.
Bye all. Take good care.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.